We are so glad to share our capstone project finally. It was such a great journey working with the climate analytics and also amazing instructor Ben and also our teams. Let's get started. This is the topic that we're going to cover in this presentation. And let's start with the project scope. So this is our overview of our project, our client, Climate Analytics, which is a prominent climate institutions providing a technical support. They are currently working with the Antigua Barbuda, making the Antigua Barbuda is a indirect client of our project as well. So our purpose is to develop two concept notes for the Green Climate Fund that align with the country priority and the GCF criteria, but also the NDC implementation. So these are specific objectives identified like financing project and component with the solid methodology and strategy. So finally, we were able to deliver two well-structured concept notes to the climate analytics. We are focusing on proposing the financing mechanism regarding the water and e-mobility. As a nature of our project, we are which is a high country-specific. Understanding country-specific challenges and priority is really crucial to shaping our project and component. Antigua Barbuda is a small island developing state located in the Caribbean, also have confronted a lot of vulnerabilities such as limited land area and exposure to coastal hazard, also high dependency in climate-sensitive sectors like tourism and agriculture livelihoods, accentuate the enhancing the resilience of the country. So, and this is a climate risk. Despite the micro contribution to the global emission, the Antigua Barbuda have a very serious climate risk, such as increasing the temperature. But our team was able to identify three specific risks, which is water, energy, and transport. This is the concept note that we developed. Under the consultation with the climate analytics, our client, and also government of Antigua Barbuda, we were able to focus on specific two areas, which is crucial to dealing with this project. That was water and e-mobility. Also, we were trying to design our project, which is solidly aligned with this 4 NDC targets. We're gonna from this. We have a very comprehensive data collection, also the analysis. We are mainly focused on the domestic and international statistic report, and also it could be the assessment conducted by the international organization, but also the government of Antigua Barbuda. And also literature review, we are spanning the policy to technology. It could be including the specific intervention, such as the flood management, and it's also the water harvesting, and also it could be the energy mix of Antigua Barbuda. And it was conducted the granted project, which is a previously conducted and also granted. That was a kind of blueprint of our project. We can identify and strategize a very effective way to cooperate it. And this is our process to research and analysis. Then first of all, we conducted the very country-specific researches. As a first step, we comprehensive analysis focusing on the country risk and priority to understand the unique context. And next, we were able to identify the specific sectoral areas such as the water and e-mobility. Then the drawing insight to the GCF approved projects in other small island developing countries which have a similar geographic condition, we can integrate it to the methodology into our concept note writing. And then finally, we delve into the detailed project breakdown for the water and e-mobility, conducting the specific assessments and analysis for each project component. And other than the research-wise, this is the overall project, that also the process that we have been through. Based on the research and gap analysis, we were able to identify and embody the project components in water and e-mobility. And we are able to go through the various consultation and the communication with the stakeholders and also clients during such as the client meetings and also the debriefing after the the mission tree from the Antigua Barbuda, that was really helped to elaborate on, also narrow down our component approaches based on their consultation and feedback. It helped to refine our approaches and development, and finally we were able to develop 2 concept notes.
Right. So if everything looks really dry up until now, apparently asking for money is not very fun. It is dry. Well, moving on, because given the evolving climate situation in this particular part of Caribbean, that is Eastern and Southern Caribbean, particularly increasing heat and decreasing rainfall patterns, and along with other hazards such as hurricanes and tropical storms, well, apparently it keeps giving. The stress on water and energy sectors are going to continue to magnify. There is no doubt about that. So given the country's negligible historic emissions, I mean, it's so negligible that nobody counts it. Even today, their current emissions are about 0.01% of the global emissions. So they're a really tiny contributor, and they're facing massive impacts. So there is an urgent need for international finance and external finance, especially because the country is extremely debt-ridden, to the point that in 2021 their overall debt was 101% of their national income. So they cannot afford to adapt without external funding. As mentioned earlier, Antigua and Barbuda's major adaptation concern is water, because they're very water stressed. They're one of the most water stressed countries in the world. Almost 100% of their water comes from desalination in years of drought. And in a normal year, when there is no drought, it's still 60 to 70%. So there is a problem there. So our findings strongly indicate that there is a need to rehaul an end-to-end rehauling of the water management in the country. So since most of the water needs are met by reverse osmosis, and that is extremely energy intensive, we believe that there is a need to reduce the demand side stress. So diversify the sources of freshwater availability, decentralize it a little bit, and we'll get to it more in the components part of this. And this in turn would also reduce the demand on electricity. There is a problem there because 93% of their electricity comes from oil. So you really, really, really need to work on that. So for the project, we are proposing 4 distinct components. The first one is 100% renewable energy for the Crabs reverse osmosis plant, which is the largest RO plant for the country. It serves almost 44% of their water needs. The second part is our community scale, large scale rainwater and stormwater harvesting system, so that for purposes such as agriculture, they don't have to depend on desalination. They can directly use water which is accessible to them. They don't have to go to an external agency, and they can maintain it as well. The third component is a national fund to replace septic tanks. So because they don't have enough problems, and again, Barbuda also doesn't have a central municipal sewage system. So basically, individual households have their own septic tanks, and they deal with it on their own, which also means that there are a lot of really old septic tanks which are aging, they're leaking, they're contaminating their groundwater sources which already don't exist. So there is a need to replace those, and also on an institutional scale for large hotels, resorts, etc., kind of promote reuse of the wastewater. So for things like irrigation or using their toilets and things like that. And the last component is an education and training module. It's not because people are not aware of climate change and the climate impacts on water, because they're facing it every day. It's mostly because there is a certain amount of confidence, lack of confidence for components such as reuse of wastewater. They just don't want to do it. We did find a lot of barriers, which we'll come to it in a little bit. For our next project, moving on to the second focus area for EV, Antigua and Barbuda has already, Antigua and Barbuda has already conducted pilot project called Sustainable Low Emission Island Mobility Project. It's a mouthful. It was funded partly by the Global Environment Facility, and as far as we understand from interviews with not direct interviews, but through climate analytics, information from the government of Antigua, that was reasonably successful. So we believe that we can actually, for our project, we propose that this should be further enhanced and expanded to include private vehicles. And there is a reason for that. Most of the road transportation in Antigua and Barbuda is private. They don't really operate on a public transportation system. So it is important to kind of include private vehicles into the e-mobility space. Road transport is the fourth largest source of emission in Antigua and Barbuda. So a transition to e-mobility will have significant emissions reduction potential. Also, given that these islands are really, really tiny, which you saw in the map, you can't probably see it. Because they're so tiny, there's a potential for easier acceptability of e-mobility because range anxiety doesn't really exist. This project also has four main components. The first one is a financing mechanism for private sector, especially dealerships, almost on like an index insurance where they're protected against losses. A rebate program for individual buyers where the difference in cost between comparable EVs and ICE vehicles will be compensated to individual buyers by the fund. The third one is electrification of the government fleet, which the government is already beginning to do, but they need help to accelerate that portion of their program. And again, a public awareness and training campaign. This is the training campaign is mostly for people like mechanics because they're not so exposed. They're not used to dealing with EVs, so they need that extra help. They need the infrastructure to take care of the vehicles that are finally imported, and everything is imported onto Antigua and Barbuda, by the way. Just saying, including the oil that they use for electricity generation. With implementing both water and e-mobility projects, there are several challenges that we identified. One is the very dynamic and apparently quick-changing policy environment in Antigua and Barbuda. For example, and this is really sad, Antigua and Barbuda actually has really ambitious targets for both their adaptation and mitigation, such as all the energy required for water and transport would be met by renewable energy by 2030, 100% of it. But recently, while we were doing this project, they signed an LNG contract which binds them to buy a certain amount of power from these sources. And these will create barriers in their adoption of renewable energy. And it hints at a certain amount of conflict between the country's NDC ambitions and targets and their actual policy environment, which is a big challenge. There's also concern over policy consistency especially for e-mobility. So, for instance, to encourage adoption of EVs, the country has waived off the import taxes on imported EVs. But the problem is that the tax waiver also applies for ICE vehicles, and so it's not really an incentive at all. If you apply it to both, it does not count. So, furthermore, there is a certain amount of uncertainty over the role and inclusion of private sector and the financial mechanisms which are going to be used or targeted by the country in itself. In addition, we must mention two constraints for the team in particular. One is that we were external to this process. We had a client and our client had a client, and ultimately the people who are going to benefit from this concept note are the client of client. And we did not have direct communication with them. It could have helped us set expectation if we did, but maybe that's a process issue. The second issue was that because the point where we entered the project, the prioritization process was still going on, and there was a significant amount of delay, which it helped us in the sense that we were able to do a lot of background work, but in terms of the actual concept notes and the development for the focus areas, it led to significant time constraints for us. Moving on. Applicability. I think the detailed report that we created, it is almost like over 30 pages long at this point, is replicable for future projects for the clients. And in our briefing to the client, actually, they also agreed to this, that it could be applied for other projects, which is great to hear. Especially for the methodology that we found useful for the development of our concept notes. It could also be used to help familiarize newer staff who don't know the GCF concept note development process, which is annoying. And the methods that we found useful, the way we broke it down, I think that could be helpful for them. Further, our research itself was very intersectional. And these inputs, I think, can be used for projects in other sectors as well, and further for countries with similar climate challenges. And that's it. Thank you.
Did you consider debt for nature swaps, essentially, because you mentioned that Antigua and Barbuda are so heavily debt ridden? There's the concept of debt for nature swaps, which allows you to pay, which allows other countries or even developing financial institutions or development financial institutions to pay the countries to decarbonize and to do some of these projects that you're talking about?
No, we did not consider that, and that's really interesting. I did not even know that something like that existed. So that's learning for me.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have maybe it's more of a logistical question, or I just don't understand. What is the process of a concept note? What does this lead to them being able to apply for Green Climate Fund?
Yeah, so this is the first step in applying for a fund from the Green Climate Fund. Essentially, this is just showing the funding agency why the projects work, what are the components of the project which are aligned to the GCF. GCF has its own priorities for different areas and different regions of the world and different countries. So how does it align to the GCF priorities? How does it align to the country priorities? It's basically saying this project is going to work and this is why it will work. Okay, thank you.